They called him many names, the child who would be a god, the arch-wizard, the unmaker of the weave, the ape who would fly, but history remembers him by one name above all others, Karsus, the Momentary God. His story is perhaps the greatest cautionary tale in all of the Forgotten Realms, a story of unparalleled genius, catastrophic hubris, and the single spell that ended an empire and changed magic forever. In the year 3163 NY, which translates to -696 DR in the Dale Reckoning calendar, something remarkable occurred in the greatest magical civilization the world had ever known. In the floating cities of Netheril, where archmages wielded power that would make modern wizards weep with envy, a child was born who would surpass them all. His name was Karsus, son of Radman. From his very first breath, Karsus was extraordinary. At the age of 2 years old, he cast his first spell, before any formal training had even begun. This was unheard of, even in an empire where magic was as common as breathing. His birth marked the beginning of what historians would later call the Shadowed Age, though none could have known then just how prophetic that title would become. By age 22, Karsus had achieved something that took other arcanists decades. He created his own floating city. But this was no ordinary enclave. Eilenar, as it was called, was the most magnificent floating city ever constructed, featuring not one but 2 Mythallars, the massive magical artifacts that kept these cities aloft. This allowed Eilenar to be twice the size of any other floating city. The architecture itself was woven with the highest tiers of magic, portals that connected distant locations, teleportation circles throughout the streets, anti-gravity chambers, and enchantments that modern wizards would struggle to comprehend. Karsus was not just powerful, he was a visionary. He founded a school of magic on his enclave that welcomed radical thinkers and those interested in what society deemed taboo projects. While other Netherese arcanists focused on refinement and tradition, Karsus pushed boundaries. Among his students was the famous Lord Shadow, and his influence would echo throughout the ages in ways both terrible and profound. To understand Karsus's folly, one must understand Netheril itself. This was not merely a kingdom, it was a magocracy of unprecedented might. The Netherese had mastered magic to such an extent that they created floating cities held aloft by Mythallars. The wizards routinely cast spells of such power that modern magic considers them impossible. What we know as 9th level spells today were commonplace in Netheril, and some arcanists experimented with magic beyond even those heights. Netheril was divided into 2 distinct cultures. High Netheril consisted of the floating enclaves where the most powerful arcanists resided, practicing magic that bent reality itself. Low Netheril comprised the ground-dwelling settlements where common folk and lesser magic users lived, though even they possessed magical knowledge far beyond what most modern civilizations could dream of. But paradise was not to last. Into this golden age came a terrible threat. The Phaerimm, a race of malevolent aberrations from deep beneath the earth. These creatures were masters of magic themselves, but their magic was fundamentally different. It drained life and magical energy from everything around them. For decades, Netheril warred with the Phaerimm, and the consequences were devastating. The Phaerimm's life-draining magic slowly turned the verdant lands of Netheril into an arid desert wasteland. Mountains crumbled into rolling hills, forests withered and died. The very geography of the land was being rewritten by the clash of these immense magical forces. The Netherese tried everything. They called upon their gods, but the deities seemed unwilling or unable to intervene directly. They unleashed their most powerful battle magic, but the Phaerimm adapted and countered. Even when the mysterious Sharn arrived and offered assistance, their strange magic only seemed to accelerate the environmental devastation when it interacted with the Phaerimm's draining spells. The greatest arcanist of Netheril began to despair. Eolim, one of the most powerful mages of the age, had developed anti-aging spells that should have made him nearly immortal, but even these were weakening due to the Phaerimm's magical interference. Eventually, he left Netheril entirely, further weakening the Empire's defenses. One by one, the most powerful defenders were falling away, fleeing or dying. And through it all, Karsus watched his beloved empire slowly dying, no matter how much he and his fellow arcanists struggled to save it. By the time these events were unfolding, Karsus had become something beyond even the legendary arcanists of Netheril. He was a 41st level wizard, a level of power that defies comprehension. For context, the most powerful wizards in modern Phaerimm, legends like Elminster and Mordkainen, are typically in their mid to late 20s in terms of character levels. Karsus had nearly doubled that. At 357 years old in the year -339 DR, Karsus had become the de facto leader of Netheril's magical defense. His mind was so powerful, so filled with arcane knowledge, that he wore a special crown, the Crown of Karsus, simply to help organize and focus his thoughts. This crown would later become an artifact of terrible power in its own right. Out of his desperation and obsession with defeating the Phaerimm, Karsus made groundbreaking discoveries. He uncovered the existence of the Shadow Weave, an alternative magic network separate from Mystral's weave. He developed heavy magic, spells so dense with magical energy that they could overwhelm normal defenses. He began researching magic beyond the 11th level, venturing into territory that no mortal had ever successfully explored. But Karsus' greatest achievement and greatest mistake would be his creation of a 12th level spell, the only spell of that magnitude ever created in the entire history of the Forgotten Realms. To really understand what Karsus did, we must understand how he thought. Like many of the Netherese arcanists, Karsus believed that the gods were nothing more than mortals who had mastered magic he hadn't yet discovered. This wasn't mere arrogance, it was the prevailing philosophy among the most powerful wizards of the age. When he began researching 12th level magic in the early 3400s NY, he concluded that this was the power that separated gods from arcanists. He reasoned, if the gods were simply beings who had achieved the highest mastery of magic, then by reaching that same level of mastery, he too could become a god. His mistake was fundamental. He believed that common magic was all that separated the gods from the archwizards. He didn't understand that divinity involved responsibilities, portfolios, and connections to reality itself that went far beyond mere magical power. It wouldn't be until the time of troubles in 1358 DR, nearly 2,000 years later, that Ao, the Overgod, would demonstrate to all of Phaerimm that there was far more to godhood than just magic. But in -345 DR, Karsus received a visit that should have been a warning. Arthendal, the Terraseer, a powerful diviner, appeared before him with a prophecy. He warned Karsus that the goddess of magic, Mystryl, was soon to face her greatest challenge, and that this would forever affect the Netherese's perception of magic. Did Karsus understand this warning? Did he realize that he himself might be that challenge? We may never know, but we do know that he shouldered what he believed was a responsibility for preserving civilization itself, and with that burden driving him forward, he completed the spell he had been developing for years. The spell was called Karsus' Avatar, and it was designed to do the impossible: temporarily steal the powers of a deity and transfer them to the caster. In Karsus' mind, this was the solution to all of Netheril's problems. If he could wield the power of a god, he could destroy the Phaerimm, heal the land, and restore his empire to its former glory. The spell took 6 hours to cast. 6 hours of continuous incantation, weaving together the most complex magical formulas ever conceived. It drew upon both the regular weave and the shadow weave, incorporating heavy magic principles to give it the raw power needed to challenge a deity. But Karsus faced a critical choice. Which deity should he target? He needed a god powerful enough that their divine essence would give him the strength to reshape reality itself. After careful consideration, he chose Mystryl, the goddess of magic itself. His reasoning seemed sound. Mystryl was the most powerful deity and the most appropriate choice for someone seeking to wield ultimate magical power. What could go wrong? Everything. In the year 3520 NY, Karsus completed the casting of his spell. For one perfect, terrible moment, it worked. The spell connected. Karsus felt Mystral's divine essence flowing into him. His body swelled with power beyond mortal comprehension. His mind expanded to encompass knowledge of all magic across the entire world. For one brief, shining instant, Karsus achieved apotheosis. He became a god. And in that instant, he realized his catastrophic mistake. You see, Mystryl wasn't just the goddess of magic, she was magic. Her portfolio included the active maintenance and regulation of the weave itself, the fundamental fabric that allowed magic to exist in a stable, controlled form throughout the world. Every spell cast anywhere in Phaerimm, every magic item, every enchantment, every ward, all of it required her constant attention and adjustment. Karsus, for all his genius and 41st level power, was still immortal. His mind, even expanded by divine essence, could not possibly handle the responsibilities of managing all magic everywhere simultaneously. He was like someone trying to operate every instrument in an orchestra at once, and the symphony of magic began to collapse into chaos. What happened next occurred in seconds, but its effects would echo through millennia. As Karsus struggled to control Mystral's divine power, the weave, already damaged by decades of war with the Phaerimm, began to catastrophically destabilize. Magic surged and fluctuated wildly across the world. Spells doubled in power for a moment, then failed entirely. The very fabric of magical reality was tearing apart. Mystryl, in her final moments of divine consciousness, understood what had to be done. If the weave completely unraveled, it wouldn't just be the end of magic, it would be the end of everything. Reality itself depended on the structure the weave provided. With her last remaining power, Mystryl made the ultimate sacrifice. She severed Karsus' connection to her divine essence, breaking his spell. And then she destroyed herself, using her own death to preserve the fundamental structure of the weave, even as all magic briefly ceased to function. When magic stopped working, even for that brief moment, the consequences were immediate and apocalyptic. The floating cities of Netheril, dozens of massive enclaves held aloft by Mythallars, simply fell. They didn't gently descend, they dropped like stones from the sky. Miles above the earth, hundreds of thousands of people lived in these cities. In an instant, they were all plummeting to their doom. Karsus himself, severed from Mystral's power, felt his body beginning to fail. But there was one final curse. His divine omniscience hadn't completely faded yet. His stony eyes, still shimmering with the last glint of godly knowledge, caught a glimpse of what he had done. He watched as his beloved Alinar, the greatest city he had ever created, smashed into the ground. He saw the other enclaves, Opus, Zinlanal, Taranthamet, all of them falling, burning, shattering against the earth. He had destroyed everything he loved, everyone he had ever known, his entire civilization, and he understood in those final moments that it was all because of him. Then his body turned to stone, a massive pillar of red-hued rock that fell from the sky and crashed into the high forest, where it would remain for thousands of years. The stone was red like blood, an eternal reminder of the catastrophe. Not all the floating cities fell. Through a combination of luck, magic, and divine intervention, a few survived. Thultanthar, also known as the City of Shade, had been moved to the Plane of Shadow just before Karsus cast a spell. His own apprentice, Telemont Tanthul, who had been studying planar magic, shifted the city into Shadowfell. It became trapped there during the magical chaos, inadvertently saving it from destruction. The city would remain in the Shadowfell for nearly 2,000 years, its inhabitants transforming into shades. When Mystryl was reborn as Mistra, she managed to catch 3 other cities and save them from complete destruction: Anaria, Asram, and Hlandath. These enclaves were high enough and falling slowly enough that the newborn goddess could guide them safely to the ground, though they were forever changed. As for the people of Netheril, those who survived scattered. The arcanists of High Netheril fled to other lands, bringing their knowledge with them. The common people of Low Netheril joined other civilizations and tribes across Phaerimm. Some ventured to other planes entirely. The great empire of magic was no more, reduced to refugees and ruins in a single day. The event became known as Karsus' Folly, a name that would become synonymous with hubris and catastrophic failure. Mystral's sacrifice was not in vain. In her final act, she transferred her divine essence into a young female wizard, and through this vessel she was reborn as Mystra, marking the first in what would become the goddess's long line of deaths and rebirths throughout history. But Mystra learned from Karsus' folly. She saw what mortals were capable of when they wielded too much power, and she enacted laws that would forever change how magic worked in the Forgotten Realms. Mistra imposed several critical restrictions on magic itself. First and foremost, spells above 9th level were permanently banned. No mortal could ever cast magic of 10th level or higher. The only 12th level spell ever created, Karsus' avatar, had its notes and formulas completely destroyed by Mistra. She swept away every scrap of information about how to cast it, reportedly sending the knowledge speeding towards the end of the universe itself. Second, spell slots were limited. Where Netheril's arcanists had once prepared dozens of high-level spells per day, wizards were now restricted in how many spells of each level they could have prepared at any given time. The days of unlimited magical power were over. Third, the connection between deities and avatar forms was severed. Gods could no longer manifest avatar forms as easily as before, reducing the risk that mortals could target them with similar spells. The very relationship between divine and mortal power was fundamentally altered. Finally, epic magic became heavily restricted. The few spells that could approach the power of old Netheril's magic required collaborative efforts, extensive research, and came with significant risks. Single casters could no longer casually wield reality-altering power. These restrictions remain in place to this day. When players in modern D&D ask why they can't cast spells beyond 9th level, the answer is Karsus. When DMs wonder why epic magic is so rare and dangerous, the answer is Karsus. The entire structure of magic in the Forgotten Realms was fundamentally altered because of one wizard's ambition. Death, for most people in the Forgotten Realms, brings an end to earthly troubles. Souls travel to the fugue plane and then to their final destinations in the afterlife. But Karsus was different. No god would accept his soul as a petitioner. None would grant him the mercy of an afterlife. Instead, his soul was bound to the material plane itself, trapped within the red stone pillar where his petrified body fell in the high forest. But his torment didn't end there. Shortly after his followers began building the city of Kars around his petrified form, an old enemy, the Lich Wulgrith, moved in. The ancient undead destroyed the nascent city and did something even worse. He split Karsus' soul into fragments using powerful necromantic magic. Karsus' fragmented spirit now exists in 3 manifestations. The first fragment radiates ephemerally within the high forest, creating a sphere of wild, chaotic magic known as the Direwood. The region is suffused with unpredictable magical effects, a constant reminder of the chaos Karsus unleashed. The second manifestation exists deep within the red stone butte that is Karsus' petrified body. His gigantic heart still beats there, radiating a permanent emotion spell of overwhelming sadness and powerlessness that can affect anyone who comes near. No saving throws permitted against it, and even magic resistance provides no defense. The radius of this effect fluctuates wildly, sometimes encompassing only the immediate area, sometimes extending across the entire Direwood. The third manifestation is a stone statue depicting Karsus in his original form, residing in a temple built atop the red stone butte. Blood continuously flows from a gaping hole in its chest, an otherworldly crimson stream that feeds into the Heartblood River, giving it the color for which it is named. During the time of troubles, the avatar of Azuth came to the Direwood and created a magical ring around it, preventing the chaotic magic from spreading further. But Karsus remains trapped, unable to depart from the realms until the sundered spirit is somehow reforged into one. For those who practice pact magic, warlocks and binders who deal with otherworldly entities, Karsus exists as a vestige. When summoned, he appears as a giant blood-red boulder, like the one in the high forest. Blood bubbles up from the top of the stone, trickling down its side and pulling at the base. When Karsus speaks, the pool fountains upwards, its height varying with the volume of his voice. Those who bind themselves to Karsus' vestige gain enhanced magical ability, especially skill with magic items and the ability to dispel magic with a touch. But they also inherit some of the arrogance for which Karsus was infamous. His hubris becomes part of their personality for the duration of the pact. The vestige of Karsus is known to have a strange enmity towards Aemon, another vestige, though the reasons for his supernatural grudge remain mysterious. The story of Karsus didn't end with his death. His influence ripples through D&D lore in countless ways, affecting storylines, items, and characters even in the modern day. While Karsus' body turned to stone, his crown did not. This artifact, which he had used to focus his incredible mental abilities, survived and became an object of terrible power. The crown of Karsus allows its wearer to wield magical power while remaining independent from the weave, exactly the kind of item Mistra fears most. The crown was so dangerous that even gods hesitated to use it. Mephistopheles, one of the archdevils, took the crown and kept it in his treasure hoard in Avernus for nearly 2,000 years. Eventually, servants of the Dead Three, Bane, Baal, and Miracle, stole it as part of their own sinister plans, a theft that would have catastrophic consequences for the Sword Coast. Remember Thultanthar, the city of shade that escaped Karsus' folly by fleeing to the Shadowfell? After nearly 2,000 years, it returned to the material plane, its inhabitants, now transformed into shades with an affinity for shadow magic, sought to create a new Netheril in their image. These Shadowvar, as they came to be known, were powerful and dangerous. They had spent millennia in the Shadowfell. They brought with them dark knowledge and shadowy power. Their return sparked new conflicts and political machinations across Phaerimm, as they attempted to reclaim what they saw as their rightful place as the dominant magical civilization. In the events of Baldur's Gate 3, the wizard Gale provides a perfect example of how Karsus' story continues to resonate. Gale, seeking to prove his love for Mystra, attempted to access forbidden levels of magic. He tried to control a fraction of the power that was unleashed during Karsus' folly, seeking to return a piece of ancient magic, a tiny diamond to an imperfect crown, as he puts it. The result? Gale's folly, as he ruefully calls it. Like Karsus before him, Gale's ambition and love led him to reach for power he couldn't safely control. The orb of Netheril's magic within him threatens to detonate with catastrophic consequences, a miniature echo of the disaster that befell Netheril itself. When Gale tells the player about Karsus, he speaks with a mixture of awe and horror. Karsus was perhaps the most powerful wizard who ever lived, the child who had become a god, the elves called him, and he tried. With a spell of his own devising, he endeavored to usurp, in one fell swoop, the power of the goddess of magic, Mystryl. She was called then. Imagine what it must have felt like to be a god, to know yourself to be untouchable, to be mistaken. Exposure to heavy magic in Karsus' proximity led to the creation of a new race of people called Karsites. These individuals were born with an inherent distrust of magic, a racial memory of the catastrophe that destroyed their ancestors' civilization. They serve as a living reminder that the consequences of Karsus' actions affected not just that generation, but all those who came after. Despite, or perhaps because of, his catastrophic failure, Karsus gained worshippers. A small cult venerated him as a momentary god, seeing in his story a different lesson than most. They were mostly based at Kars until the city's abandonment, but pockets of believers have existed throughout history. What do they worship? Some see him as a martyr who tried to save his people. Others view him as a symbol of reaching beyond mortal limitations, regardless of the cost. Still others are drawn to the tragedy of it all. The greatest wizard who ever lived, forever trapped in an eternal moment of realization and regret. Karsus' story raises profound questions that scholars, wizards, and adventurers continue to debate. Was Karsus evil? This is perhaps the most contentious question. By alignment, Karsus was chaotic neutral, neither good nor evil. His motivations weren't malicious. He genuinely believed he was trying to save his civilization. He saw his people dying, his empire crumbling, and the gods unwilling or unable to help. In desperation, he took action. But his method involved attempting to steal the power of a goddess, and his arrogance led him to believe he could handle responsibilities that even gods found challenging. Was he evil? Probably not. Was he hubristic, arrogant, and ultimately responsible for genocide on an unimaginable scale? Absolutely. Could he have succeeded? Some scholars wonder, what if Karsus had chosen a different deity? Mystral's portfolio required constant maintenance of the weave. What if he had targeted a god with a simpler portfolio, a god of war or storms or even death? The answer, according to most experts, is still no. The fundamental problem wasn't just maintaining the weave, it was the divinity itself involves more than just power. Gods are woven into the fabric of reality in ways that mortals, no matter how powerful, cannot replicate. Karsus' spell worked for a moment, yes, but it could never have worked permanently. Here's a dark philosophical question. Mystryl sacrificed herself to prevent total magical collapse, but in doing so, she severed Karsus' connection and caused all magic to fail, which led to the fall of the floating cities and the deaths of hundreds of thousands. What if she had done nothing? The weave might have completely unraveled, potentially ending reality itself. Or perhaps Karsus might have eventually gained control and actually saved Netheril. This is the divine trolley problem. Kill hundreds of thousands to potentially save reality, or risk everything on the hope that an overwhelmed mortal might somehow succeed where even a goddess struggled. Mystryl made her choice. We live in the world that resulted from it. The story of Karsus is a goldmine for DMs looking to create compelling narratives. Karsus represents the ultimate hubris arc. He had everything: power, knowledge, good intentions. What he lacked was wisdom and humility. This makes him a perfect mirror for player characters who might be getting too confident. Consider having an NPC mentor tell the party Karsus' story when they're considering a particularly dangerous magical ritual. Or have them discover Netheril's runes, where they can see firsthand the consequences of unchecked ambition. Items from Netheril are incredibly powerful because they were created before Mystra's restrictions on magic. A Netheril's magic item might function at a level that modern enchantments can't match, but they also carry risks. Imagine the party finds a Netheril spell scroll containing a 10th level spell, something that shouldn't exist. Do they use it? Do they risk attracting Mystra's attention? What happens if they succeed? The region where Karsus' petrified form fell is a perfect adventure location. Wild magic surges, unpredictable effects, and the overwhelming sadness that radiates from Karsus' heart create a unique and challenging environment. Perhaps the party needs to retrieve something from the Direwood. Perhaps they need to perform a ritual at the site of Karsus' fall. Perhaps someone is trying to free Karsus' spirit, and the party must decide whether this is a good idea. In Neverwinter Nights, Shadows of Underentide, there's a storyline where an adventurer meets Karsus' spirit trapped in a magical hell created by a cursed book. The adventurer can choose to redeem Karsus by rewriting the tome, allowing him to help in a later battle. This presents an interesting moral choice. Does Karsus deserve redemption? He destroyed an empire, but he did so trying to save it. He caused catastrophic loss of life, but he lived in eternal torment for it. The party had the power to free him from his curse. Should they? The Shadowvar make excellent antagonists or complex allies. They carry the pride and power of ancient Netheril but have been transformed by millennia in the Shadowfell. Do they seek to restore their empire, to learn from Karsus' mistake, or to repeat them? At its core, Karsus' story is about the dangers of believing you know better than everyone else. It's about the difference between power and wisdom, between genius and judgment. Karsus was by all accounts one of the most brilliant wizards to ever live. He mastered magic in an age when most children are learning to read. He created a floating city at 22. He reached 41st level when most legendary wizards top out in their 20s. His intellect was staggering, his magical knowledge unmatched. But all that brilliance couldn't give him the wisdom to know when to stop. He was so confident in his abilities, so certain of his understanding, that he never considered the possibility that he might be wrong. His closest advisors pleaded with him not to cast the spell. He ignored them. He was Karsus. He knew best. And in the space of minutes, he learned that he didn't. The elves called him many things, and each name tells part of his story. They called him the child who would be a god, acknowledging his ambition from the very beginning. They called him the Momentary God, marking what he achieved for one brief, terrible instant. They called him the Unmaker of the Weave, describing what his spell nearly accomplished. They called him the Ape Who Would Fly, their judgment on his hubris, suggesting he reached for something fundamentally beyond his nature. They called him the Arch-Wizard, recognizing his genuine power and achievement. Some called him Karsus the Mad after understanding what he had done. Each name is true. Each name is insufficient. Karsus was all of these things and none of them completely. In the end, Karsus' story is a tragedy in the classical sense. He was a great man brought low by not external forces, but by his own fundamental flaw. His intelligence became arrogance, his power became overconfidence, his love for his people became the instrument of their destruction. There's a reason this story resonates so powerfully through D&D lore. It's not just about magic or gods or ancient empires. It's about the human condition, or in this case the Netheril's condition. It's about how the things that make us great can also be the seeds of our downfall. When you walk through the ruins of fallen Netheril in your campaigns, remember that these cities didn't fall because they weren't powerful enough. They fell because their greatest wizard believed he could do anything, and in trying to prove it, he destroyed everything. Karsus stands as an eternal warning. Power without wisdom is not just useless, it's catastrophic. Knowledge without humility leads not to enlightenment but to disaster. And sometimes the greatest threat to a civilization comes not from outside enemies but from those who love it so much they'll risk everything to save it. Somewhere in the high forest a red stone pillar still stands. Blood still trickles from the statue at its peak. The heart within still beats with endless sorrow. The spirit of Karsus, fragmented and tormented, relives that moment of divine omniscience over and over. The moment when he realized what he had done, saw his empire falling from the sky, and understood that he was the one who had destroyed everything he loved. To be a god, to know yourself to be untouchable, to be mistaken.